Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Lunar Alchemy. My name is John, and I'm here with Bella, and I'm so excited to be discussing with you the transit of the 64 and the archetype of the artist, which carries us from the shadow of confusion to the city of illumination. And it is the pathway of imagination. And this one is quite an interesting combination of elements because it's fire and water, and they have a particular relationship that we don't often see in other places that we look at this alchemical process occurring. And so as a part of the Ring of Alchemy, I imagine that we're going to be discussing a range of different topics, and this archetype of the artist, one of my favorites. So thank you all for being here with us on this unusual timing for our Lunar Alchemy call. It seems that the dynamism of our experience is just starting to unfold in new and extended ways. So thank you for being with us. And Bella, thank you for making time for us today so that we could share this. What are you excited about with this transit? What are you thinking about? And I'm always curious to hear more about your inner artist, because I know you have one. And when we come around to this time, I feel as if your perspective offers a really a way to look at this archetype that oftentimes we don't get an opportunity to see, just because of the conditioning that we all have received about how good each of us as an individual may or may not be at art and our imagination and our creativity and all of that stuff. This is a huge load of conditioning. And when you talk about it, I feel like, oh, that's a different way to see things.
Yeah, I feel with this archetype name, it was the artist that felt very natural for us. It wasn't one of those keys that were hard to find a name for. However, if I would name it again, maybe I would name her Tantrika or something like that, because it is to meet life in every moment, and we have fire and water interacting here. And I believe that it's definitely an archetype that lives outside the comfort zone. And you can see that when you're an artist, because you're not going to create something amazing if you do what you always did and it's inside the comfort zone, because that's not going to be art. And the same thing with the tantric. Somehow you are taking a risk when you're completely present and open to life in every moment, whatever comes at you. So whether we use one name or the other, really the essence of this archetype is a life lived on the edge of something new and fresh, which actually brings us back to the first gene key, which is about freshness. And that is how you are always going to be in a state of creation and not in a state of entropy.
Yeah, so this is one of those keys that brings our understanding of the entire system that we're working with here, whether it's human design or gene keys or the I Ching itself, how we can understand this full flow that is never broken, that each aspect that we focus on flows to the next and flows to the next. And here we are at the end of our 64 codons, and yet that codon indeed flows directly into the next, sequentially as well as in harmony within our experience. And what is really interesting to me about how this particular frequency spectrum functions is that it's so out there compared to the ways that we've learned to function as human beings in society, and to the degree that we can embrace something like cooperation or synergy in our lives. This archetype is just completely from a different place. And I wonder, when I think about this, it makes me think of when this gene key is described, and the wildness and the sort of untamed aspect of it, and the spontaneity of it, and the unstructured, the way that creation happens is not through this sequence of events, but through almost a spontaneous manifestation of creation. It makes me think of the cosmic mother to a certain extent, and the aspect of it that feels almost beyond this reality. And so I wonder how you relate this. I mean, it's really interesting to bring in the Tantrika, because to me, I feel like then the Tantrika is beginning to touch that place. And the artist does too, but it's through a muse. It's like this sort of divine blast of inspiration, and then all of a sudden, all of this creation happens. So I'd be curious to hear more about how you see this energy, the cosmic mother, being at the very end, the 64th, and then at the very beginning is the spark, which, it's kind of like the cosmic birth of everything. So I'd love to hear you speak about that a little bit.
Today, when I hear you say the cosmic mother, I do feel into Shakti and that element, which is the combination of fire and water. And in some way, our acts as human beings into that. Because if we would think about it from the mind, it would be, fire and water. That's not a fun combination, because as soon as you put water on fire, it dies, right? But if we are thinking about this beautiful orgasmic energy, which is in a way the feminine, the multi-orgasmic flowing of life, and we think of that again, that orgasmic eruption, where we have the fire and the water coming together. And I definitely believe that we are waking up to that, and not only women. And here we can also go back thousands of years to something that is connected to the I Ching with the Tao, and we come to that understanding of the energy circulation and of being multi-orgasmic, which is completely present with life in bliss in every moment. And there are people like Mantak Shia that have taken that also to the Western world, and speaking about what it is to be multi-orgasmic as a woman and as a man, and how we can create that circulation in the body, and even connected to similar as we have on the yogic path with the bandhas and the pumps, is what he called them in the body, how we can become aware of that energy. So for me, when we look at, for example, the 37 and the 22, which are both in Pisces, I feel like they're both that invitation to the cosmic mother, and to allow her to live within us. And again, I do believe when it comes to the tantric path, for me, it's not a worship outside of you. And we can see that your life's work as well, John, in the 29th, that devotion, at the end of the day, it's not a devotion to something outside of you, because in that devotion, you actually become one with the beloved, or one with the object of devotion. And that's what I'm feeling into here. It's this invitation into rapturous life that has both the cooling water and the heat of the fire, and they are not in the paradox in a way is that they're not separate, and they are not contrary to each other. They're working together.
Yeah, this whole idea that I haven't ever seen placed in this particular way before, the way that it fits within the gene keys, and how we can see the 64th gene key correlates to the path of Tantra, and how the 63rd gene key correlates to the path of yoga, the structured, systematized method by which any human being can realize the divine. And with this archetype, with the 64th, it's like that other element where it's the wildness and the unpredictability and the just all-encompassing aspect of it, that anything that exists comes from there on a certain level. And so when these energies are playing together and we're looking at them as elements, like Tantra is based on fire and water, period. And I don't exactly remember where the reversal is, where water is on top and fire is on the bottom. It's a different energetic relationship. And in this particular hexagram, we have fire up on top over water. And when we look at how does fire function, how does water function? Well, water flows downwards. There's only a couple places in the world where we can witness it going up. And it's usually because of, like temperature vents and these things happening at waterfalls and stuff, but always water goes down. But you can't make a flame go downwards, fire goes up. So when we look at this upward motion and the downward motion, what I'm thinking to myself is like, okay, what do we do when we go down? It's like we go deeper. Of course, my 29 is speaking. We go deep, we go down into the abyss, we go into the depths. And then what happens with the flame? We go up into rapturous, my evolution, the 30, we go up into the rapture of divinity. So it's like this particular energy frequency here I've got some fire, and down here I've got some water, and they're like going opposite directions. And from being inside a human body right now, I'm looking at this going like, how do these relate at all? They're going in completely different directions. What does that leave us with? And I'd be curious to know about your perspective on that relationship, and like what is happening here in this like movement possibility that we can like draw something from to understand what's behind this tantra that we're talking about.
That is so interesting. I just have to tell you all, if you have seen the second gene key, when the 1 and the 2 are kind of starting, right? And then the 63 and the 64 are ending. So right as you're asking that question, I have a quite big canvas with a second gene key archetype painting on the wall right in front of me. And it just fell right down on the floor. And like kicked down a Buddha who's sitting there meditating under it.
Oh my goodness, I love it.
It's very interesting. Right under it was the Buddha, and there was also this time glass that is increased, like it's very fragile, and for some reason it knocked down the Buddha, but it didn't knock down the time glass.
Wow.
Okay, so that's fire coming in. So I feel that because some of you might be a little bit more in the starting of contemplating the I Ching. So I feel it can be helpful as we're speaking about the elements to show you this. So what John was speaking to is the fire, which is going upwards, right? And then the water, in a way, that's like staying on the bottom. And here again, I would ask if maybe when we are looking at the cosmic mother, and I'm actually feeling into the great mother in those archetypes that we do find in the 37 and the 22, I wonder if that isn't the fire that in a way is always kind of over us as humans on this earth. And also if you think about the elements, and some of you have done our archetype courses where we go into the I Ching, we look at the 8 elements, and we can see in the sequential way of looking at the wheel, we're going to see that a lot of archetypes have the fire on the bottom. And actually, if I remember right, both the 37 and the 22 have the fire, and it's in that last part of the wheel where we have Pisces in the Western astrology. And when we have what I believe in the I Ching, we have that transformational fire that's there. And in a way, it's what you're saying as well with the body. It's the courage to have that transformation within the body, but a transformation that's alchemical and also goes beyond the body. And I also feel that the water somehow is that body, because our body is 70% of water. So when we allow the cosmic mother to come in, and the fire that's transformational to alchemically work in the body, in the water, that's when we have this. So, well, that's when we have the possibility for illumination. And here we can see alchemical art balances divergent forces, discovering the ecstatic within the divine. And the braid as well comes from looking at water, which is the water goddess archetype, half-heartedness, commitment, and devotion. And then we have the fire starter archetype, desire, lightness, and rapture. So when we look at those two archetypes together, they are creating the archetype, which is the artist. And the shadow frequency becomes confusion, is desiring, half-heartedness. Imagination is lightness in commitment, and illumination is rapturous devotion. And I can say something more about that later, but I want to let you in as well, because we kind of answered, or I spoke to something that you asked before we move on, John, to something else.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually, there's another pathway that I also want to explore, but I'm kind of like, I'm looking at this braid, and this is very interesting because, my life's work is water over water. My evolution is fire over fire. And when I think of the relationship between those things, perhaps because of that arrangement within my activation sequence, I can only conceive of water over fire. And when we flip it like this, looking at confusion, it's like, I'm like, man, how is that happening? And then even with imagination, because I've done so much work with imagination. When I was young, I was like, oh, I want to grow up to be an artist. I just thought imagination was the greatest thing ever. And if there was a show about imagination that when I was a kid, I was like, whoa, I want to watch that show. It's talking about imagination. Like, there's going to be something creative in there that's going to make me excited. I'm going to feel good. And somehow lightness and commitment, it's like it's bringing up this feeling of me in me, where there's some conditioning blocks in the collective around, well, what does it mean to be committed? And it's like lightness and commitment, those things don't go together. There's seriousness in commitment, but lightness and commitment, how does that open the door for imagination? And if we have an experience of lightness in our body that we can connect with, and we have an experience of commitment in our life, how is that opening this doorway to imagination? I mean, I sort of feel like I'm having a stream of consciousness contemplation happening, coming out of my mouth as we're speaking together about this. And what I feel like, what really kind of landed for me, is discovering the ecstatic within the divine, because I feel as if ecstasy isn't something that we make, isn't something that we do. It's like this thing that we discover, at whether it's at the bottom of the abyss or at the height of the flames. It's like all of a sudden we get there and ecstasy just goes poof. And then we get to ride that train for a while. and it's an incredible discovery when and if it happens, and I'm just thinking of like, okay, well, how do we bring ecstasy into these forces so that we can kind of understand, like, oh, well, here I am, a human being. How do I relate to another human being and harness this energy, or other human beings,
Yeah, where I grabbed on was about that confusion and the way that through the braid it was described. Let's see if I can just read it to everybody. Confusion is desiring half-heartedness. What my experience is, and maybe we spoke about this last year when we were focusing more on the shadows, but really when I think back on the 64, it's something with timing. And I do believe that a lot of people, the 64, are a bit in conflict with time, I think, and possibly also because the cross of consciousness, which is one of the crosses that we have here, has the 5 and the 35. So it's 64, 63, 5 and 35 in whatever order. And you have the impatience there. So this is Richard Rudd's cross, for example. We worked with Simone before, who has that cross as well. And there seem to be sometimes on the confusion or the conflict is that there is not a sync in time, where we kind of try with the mind, for example, or with our human part, we try to control it with time. And I feel that any piece of art is not something that it has its own timing, and it's not controlled with time. And I can also see that it actually takes quite a while. So having followed Richard Rudd for over a decade, I can definitely look back to when we were sitting with him in Scotland, and he was basically saying that the gene keys for him was just something he'd done out of his heart, out of love. He has a fourth line pearl, so charity, and a fourth line life's work. And that it's nothing that had actually even really given food to his family for all the years since he wrote the book. And then having seen him as a 4-6, so sixth line being coming down from the roof in the last 5 years, exactly when COVID and all of the things happened in the world where everything became online, his team had already decided that they were going to do everything online. So that was were those big deep dives, they call them. They had 3,000 people, 4,000 people, a lot of people coming into the Gene Keys. So to see that, and we are going to sit in ceremony with Rachel, with John, with Ashley, a big part of our team actually this weekend. And the medicine man who's coming, it's a friend of mine. He's a 6'3", and he has a 64, as Richard has, in his life's work. And I have definitely seen him in the last 7-8 years completely transform. And he was an amazing artist before that. He is an artist both with music and flute and with painting. If you go to the 32nd door in the free library on Unlock Your Design, you're going to see his art, you're going to hear his music, you can go to SoundCloud. And it's something definitely that has come with time. And he's somebody who learned, he's autodidact. How do you say that in English? When somebody learns by themselves. What's the word?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he learned all this himself. He's even like learned to play the guitar on the, he does play the right-handed guitar, but he learned to do it like the other way around because he's left-handed. So definitely an artist that is always in evolution. And if he wanted to be the artist and the medicine man that he's today, that could never happen. And that would have been a conflict or a confusion to try to be there before you're there. And that's definitely what I can see with many people that have the 64 prominent in their charts. And maybe in one way, because the 1 and the 2 and the 63 and the 64 kind of are speaking to the whole humanity. This is probably a shadow that many of us are also in one way or another living in our life.
Yeah, so when you bring in this theme of time, it really begins to illuminate, no pun intended, what it means to live with this energy. Is that our idea of timing itself. And it's so interesting that just so recently we went through Divine Will, with the 40, because that's another one that brings in, that weaves in this theme of time and the possibility for creation through this particular gene key is so powerful. This archetype is so powerful. In fact, our entire world, when we recognize an artist at the heights of the gift frequency, this is genius in action. And we all remember all their names. I mean, who doesn't know about Picasso? Who hasn't heard of Leonardo da Vinci? We remember these names because they harness this energy to some extent, and we're able to express it in such a way that makes everyone else turn and look at what they're doing. And so when people choose a pathway to follow, you end up with generations upon generations of artists, people who desire to wear the archetype of the artist as their personality, who are inspired by the work that they've done, but are not yet tapping into the wellspring from which that art arose. And tapping into that wellspring and burning with the fire, that doesn't happen when we decide. It happens in its own time. And when I look at this archetype of the artist, and maybe even to a certain extent, the tantrika that you've suggested here, it's like the way that we often encounter tantric practice in the West is through this kind of sexual practice. And one of the aspects of that practice is the timing, that the timing cannot be rushed. It must be just simply flowed with, to allow that fire to rise up in its own time. And it really kind of, wherever this is leading at the moment, I feel like it taps into these ideas of awareness that have been rising in the last maybe decade or so around getting into a flow state, around cultivating our choices so that we can move into these states of consciousness that allow for flow to happen, and that somehow stoke and cultivate that inner fire. And I wonder, I don't have the 64 anywhere in my chart, and so I wonder how those who have that definition experience that connection to flow and fire, water and fire. I'm kind of using those metaphorically for flow, and fire is the same in physical and when we use it as like an internal thing, it's still fire. Flow and fire, how does that come up through the artist? And are they even doing anything on purpose that allows them to connect with those energies? Because I mean, in my desire to take on this archetype myself, when I was young, I wanted to be a professional musician. I wanted to be an artist. Even when I was younger than that, I wanted to be a visual artist because I love to draw and I love the imagination. But in the end, for me, it was always about freedom. But as I was going through that process, I would look at artists who I could look at and just go like, oh my gosh, there's an artist. Now I try and understand, what are they doing that's making them that way? How are they engaging with that energy, with all of that flow and all of that fire at once? And so it arises for me as a question, like, is Richard Rudd even making a choice to do anything? Or is it just kind of like spontaneously he finds himself in this new quantum pattern after just following the last flow of energy?
I feel that with that, definitely with the name in the I Ching, so this is before completion, which means there's always something new possible, right? That feels super telling. And I feel this time I want to bring in, because for two reasons I want to bring in Sergio and the way that he's looking at it. So now we're going to have a bit of that international. So this is Sergio Arboleda and his astrological method in a way of looking at the I Ching. So start here with the, so here I feel again we can use just the image to feel into this archetype on the yellow background, and then we have the blue or the indigo being, and in this system the yellow stands for the fire, and it also is connected to Gemini because Gemini is all the time adhering to something, it's connecting with things the same way that the fire, it would attach on. Like if I put fire in my hair right now, it would attach it all right away and connect with it. So that's the yellow on the background. And then with the blue or the indigo, the purple, we have the being here, and that is the water. So that's the depth of it, the transformation, the purple color. And then here you see a symbol that you could use, for example, for just contemplation or meditation, like a yantra almost. And the verb in this jinki is discover. So if we are speaking about before completion and there's always something more, well, to discover, because that is the verb. And then here we can see a little bit more when we go into the geometry of it. And what's interesting here because we have this perfect geometry with yin yang all the way threaded, when we are looking in the inner trigram. So if we don't look at the base and the top one, we're looking at the 3 lines in here and the 3 lines here, of course, is also going to be the same. So in this figure here, we're going to have the background and we're going to have the being, but we're also going to have 2 inner trigrams. And in this case, these inner trigrams are the same using the colors. It's also water and fire. And that is actually what's going to create this braid here, very much like we create the braid with the gene keys and the elements. So here it is to discover so that we can realize. And what we are told to do is to observe the essential. And I definitely believe, if I think about Alvaro, the medicine man, if I think about Richard Rudd, if I think about people that have this 64, a really good way to in a way move beyond that confusion is to focus on the essential. And then even time in a way is not important anymore. So I like to look at the 64 from this perspective, as there's always something more to discover, something more to connect to in the background as you're walking on that path of growth and transformation as a human being.
This energy really brings me into a state of, it's like the basis for anticipation. Like there's always something just beyond. And as we engage with this energy, as we connect with that reality, sometimes that reality opens up with the discovery. I just love the choice of that connection to that word, because when we look at the I Ching's title of before completion, it's such a paradoxical irony that the very last hexagram in the I Ching is titled before completion, because we get there and we're like, oh, I think we're finished. And yet here's this energy that is saying, no, not quite. There's still more. There's still something beyond. There's still the next spark to come. And when we're looking at this gift of the imagination, I feel as if when people talk about creativity, it's like this experience that's fixed, where, oh, I'm going to be a creative person and I'm going to make something up. And then I'm going to use that thing that I made up to generate massive success in my life. Well, that's not what creativity is really. I mean, being creative is about living on the precipice, on the edge of this unfolding process. It's not about, that process that I described of being creative and creating success, that feels way more like the 63. It's like, well, what's the system? Well, you come up with a novel idea, and then you step by step, you walk through the path of that. And here comes this energy afterwards, and it's like, no, you come up with a novel idea and then you throw it away. You burn it up and you move on to the next novel idea, and the next and the next and the next. And it has this like energy of like, ooh, we're moving forward. It's almost like when we look at the gene keys in human design and talk about, oh, this is the drivers of evolution. Here we have it right here. Like, you have to move forward. And one of the, now this is making me think of something that I thought of before around the ecstasy of the divine. And it's this idea that at the very, very, very base, at the deepest part of the abyss of suffering, when you actually touch that deepest place, which is really no place at all, it opens up into this total ecstasy. And I got to witness that process happening one time. And it caught me by such surprise, because when you're in the depths of the deepest suffering, the last thing on your mind is ecstasy. You're just like, oh my God, can it even get worse than this? And somehow this energy can drive you deeper into it to find it, to discover a deeper layer of it, until suddenly you just like fully surrender into the whole process, and you stop believing that you can resist this suffering. And the moment that happens in this deep, deep level, it just like explodes into this total rapture. And when we look at our way of seeing the world as good and bad, then we're relating to the world from the standpoint of gene key 1 is the beginning and gene key 64 is the end. And therefore, our only experience can happen within these two at either side of the spectrum. And yet, both of them are saying that, nope, there is no completion. And that there's no such thing as good and bad. And that everything that's divine fully encompasses and informs everything that we may judge as good and bad, as shadow and light. And it's just like, I mean, thinking about this one just takes me into this other place of possibility of what it means to be human, and the fact that we have access to this level of possibility. And I don't know if you have thoughts about that, Bella, but this idea of suffering and ecstasy, and there is no ending, and there's only an opportunity to open for the next quantum transformation. I mean, even as we look at the gene keys and we're like, oh gosh, well, looks like the cities are about the end of the line. Well, are they?
Yeah, I hear the whole cross of consciousness again when I hear you. And I remember I did a few years ago have a friend who was playing the piano, and I was just sitting, I think I was in LA in a hotel room or something, and I was listening to that piano, and I created this poem where I was speaking over the piano, and I recorded it just on my, like the voice recording on my phone. And it was about the spirals of life. And of course, boundlessness and timelessness in the 5 and the 35. And now I feel like you kind of added in the whole cross of consciousness to that. and it gave me chills. And sometimes when I listen to that again, I'm like, oh, I wonder, that's interesting, like what state was I in? And I feel like you said in the beginning, that inner creative. And I know when I was a child, how much I was painting, and I was doing things with clay and so many things. And still, when I went back to my dad's house to look in the attic, all the things from long ago, I had all these things, even with everything that you create. I mean, even the things where you're making candles, or you're making the things that you put when you break your arm, like the cast, that kind of thing to create figures with. There was boxes and boxes and boxes, and there were like all these little things that you're doing, that you can do jewelry with, and some kind of clay also that you put in the oven, and you also do earrings. It was so much, and I wondered where that went. And I feel for me, part of it was because I moved away when I was 18, and it's not really, when you live in a place, you might live there for 6 months. Like, I didn't kind of create that studio where I could really create with my hands in art. And I feel that very much where I went to was the movement of the body. And I wanted to dance, but then again, I've always been very logical. So then it felt like I cannot just dance. I have to kind of create a business around it, the dance school. I have to run a nightclub. I've spoken about that before. So it's been hard for me to allow myself to just be in that not logical, the abstract, the creative part, and completely give myself to that. Definitely has been something that still today, I mean, part of what we're going to do even this weekend, I'm like, yeah, this is part of my life's work. And I've assisted this kind of container so many times. And it's almost like I do it because I'm part of the walls. And I don't necessarily think that that's bad, because I guess also as is 4-6 and soon coming, not soon, but on in the mid part of being on the roof, the way that I come down into the world again, it's very much by example, and by actually doing it together with that connection of the fourth line. So without giving an answer to what you're saying, these are the things that are popping up for me as I hear you speak about the spirals that are not ending as what we know as an ending, at least.
Yeah, you just make me think of what Richard Rudd shares about the 64 ways, I believe, with this gene key, is how imagination is not something that we sit down and dream about or think about or fantasize. It's like the actual real working out, real world manifestation of this energy. And when I think about a young child who's engaging with that energy, who loves to create things out of clay or loves to paint or something like that, we just get this incredible look at this process in action. And as we become adults, how can we, the question that I desire to live with is, how can I create into the world in such a way that not only harnesses this energy, but allows it to come into being for the benefit of all? And to me, I mean, this one being the final gene key within the sequence, I mean, it's got them all. It's not just that the 1 and the 2 and the 63 and the 64 have them all. This one even has them all. Even though, of course, there's nuances and differences between them. Perhaps that's true about all of the gene keys when we get to that acidic frequency. But it's just such a beautiful one to spend time with in contemplation and to ask new questions. I feel like that's really one of the ways that the doors can open for this energy to come forward into living. And I'm so excited about all of the possibilities that are here.
Yeah.
So, please, last thoughts, Bella, on
I feel this is what's bridging into the transmission that you're going to do, but I just wanted to remember everybody to remember in where we are astrologically. So Virgo energy, mutable earth. And that's the realm where the artist or the tantrika is working. It's alchemical, it's in the body. And it's in that, in a way, the everyday and the habits of the everyday. So it's not that you can be an artist sometimes, it's all the time in how you move through the world and what the alchemy is in your body. So that feels as a segue somehow into working with alchemy of the body that we're going to do with the people that are part of the membership.
Yes, thank you. So to everyone on this call who's listening to this, thank you so much for your presence, for all of your participation on this chat. Really, really beautiful to see all of the wisdom flowing on this chat and all of the contemplations flowing through this chat. And I'm just really feel grateful to have this opportunity for us to explore with you, and am looking forward always to more. I do want to say today that in terms of the transmissions, at some point in the future, when the time is right, I have found the artist who will bring visual representation to the energetic transmission that happens. And I'm so excited for this possibility because it's going to bring an entirely new layer to what we're creating. So thank you all for being here. We'll see you again, not next week on Monday. We will send out an announcement about that probably on Thursday about the time to expect that to be. And we'll look forward to meeting you in discussion at that time. And I'm sending loving presence to your heart from mine. And we will begin our transmission now with our members in the other room. So until we see you again, bye-bye for now. Have a beautiful remainder of your 64th before completion transit and engagement with the artist. Bye-bye for now.